Evening, old-timer. A bit lost, are we? The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of smooth condescension that only comes from someone who has never been truly tested. It cut through the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses at the Marine Corps birthday ball. Colonel Matthews, all starched dress blues and polished brass, stood with his arms crossed, a perfect picture of authority looking down at imperfection. The man he addressed was seated alone at a small, out-of-the-way table, almost blending into the shadows. He was old, maybe 80, maybe more. His suit was dark and well-kept, but it had the faint sheen of age, a garment that had seen many years and few formal occasions. His hands, resting on the white tablecloth, were gnarled with arthritis, yet they lay perfectly still. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, clear and steady as a winter sky, met the colonel's. They held no fear, no defensiveness, just a quiet, patient observation. "This is a restricted event," Matthews continued, his voice dropping a little, as if explaining something to a child. "For active duty personnel, esteemed veterans, and their registered guests. Your name wasn't on any list I saw." The old man simply looked at him, the silence stretching just long enough to become uncomfortable. A few younger officers nearby had noticed the interaction and were smirking, enjoying the spectacle of the spit-and-polish colonel dealing with what they assumed was a confused gatecrasher. "I was invited," the old man said, his voice raspy but firm, like stones rubbing together. Matthews let out a short, humorless laugh. "Invited? By who?" "The ghost of Chesty Puller." The junior officers chuckled. "Look, Grandpa, I'm sure you served your time, and we appreciate it. But this is a night for the modern Corps. Things have changed. Why don't you let me have someone call you a cab?" He gestured vaguely toward the exit, a king dismissing a court jester. The old man's gaze didn't waver. "I'm fine right here." The colonel's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to being ignored. He was a full-bird colonel on the fast track, a man who commanded battalions and made decisions that affected thousands. This quiet defiance from a frail-looking civilian was an irritant, a piece of grit in the otherwise flawless machinery of his evening. He leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. "Listen to me, old man. I am the senior officer hosting this event. I am giving you a polite opportunity to leave. Do not make me escalate this." His eyes flicked down to the old man's lapel. There was a single, small pin there, dark and indistinct. It wasn't a purple heart, or a silver star, or anything recognizable. It was just a small, dark shape. "What's that little trinket?" Matthews sneered. "Perfect attendance award from the VFW Hall." The old man's hand drifted up and brushed the pin, a gesture of unconscious familiarity. "It was given to me. A long time ago." "I'm sure it was," Matthews said, his patience finally snapping. He straightened up, his voice ringing out for all to hear. "I've had enough of this. You're either senile or just plain stubborn. Either way, you're leaving." He put a hand on the old man's shoulder, firm and commanding, intending to lift him from the chair. The instant the colonel's fingers pressed into the thin fabric of the old suit jacket, the world dissolved for Arthur Vance. The scent of perfume and floor wax vanished, replaced by the thick, metallic smell of blood and cordite. The gentle strains of the string quartet were drowned out by the deafening roar of a helicopter's rotors and the rhythmic chatter of machine gun fire. He was no longer an old man in a ballroom. He was 28 years old, his face painted in green and black, the weight of his ruck and weapon a familiar ache in his bones. He was kneeling in the red dust of a forgotten country, the sun a merciless hammer overhead. The hand on his shoulder wasn't a colonel's. It was the desperate grip of a young operator, a kid named Miller, whose eyes were wide with shock and pain, a dark red stain spreading across his chest. They're everywhere," Miller gasped, his voice a wet rattle. We're cut off." Arthur's gaze swept the ridgeline. Muzzle flashes winked like malevolent fireflies. They were caught in a classic L-shaped ambush. Pinned down. 6 men against what sounded like 50. His mind, a razor-sharp calculator honed by 1,000 hours of brutal training and a dozen real-world operations, processed the variables. No cover. No retreat. No air support for at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes they didn't have. He keyed his radio, his voice impossibly calm in the storm of chaos. "This is Delta Actual. All stations, pop smoke. On my command, we shift fire to the primary axis. B team, you are on me. We are breaking contact through their flank. I say again, we are assaulting the flank. It was suicide. A textbook impossibility. You don't assault into an ambush, especially not when you're outnumbered 8-1. But Arthur saw the one thing the enemy didn't expect. A sliver of a ravine, a tiny crease in the earth not visible from the ridgeline. It was a 1 in a million chance. It was their only chance. Sir, that's insane. Another voice crackled over the radio. Move. Arthur commanded, the single word carrying the weight of absolute authority. He squeezed Miller's shoulder, the same place Matthews was touching him now, and Ian away. Stay with me, son. We're getting you home. He saw the hope flicker in the young man's eyes, the trust placed in him, the leader, the one who carried the burden for them all. The ballroom snapped back into focus. The sounds, the smells, the faces. Colonel Matthews' hand was still on his shoulder, his face a mask of smug impatience. But something had changed. Arthur's eyes were different. The quiet patience was gone, replaced by an intensity that was ancient and terrifying. It was the look of a man who had made life and death decisions in a heartbeat, who had stared into the abyss and made it blink. Matthews felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. He instinctively pulled his hand back as if he'd touched a live wire. The old man hadn't moved a muscle, yet the entire dynamic in the room had shifted. The smirks on the faces of the junior officers faltered. They saw it too, that flicker of something primal in the old veteran's gaze. Trying to regain his footing, to reassert the dominance that was slipping from his grasp, Matthews fell back on his authority. He puffed out his chest, his voice louder than necessary. I asked you a question, old man, and I'm done playing games. What was your rank? What was your unit? I want to know who I'm throwing out of my event. Arthur Vance looked Colonel Matthews dead in the eye. The sounds of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar, the entire universe narrowing to the space between them. When he spoke, his voice was low, but every single person in the vicinity heard it as clearly as a gunshot in a library. You asked my rank, he said slowly, deliberately. The records are sealed. You asked my unit. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. They called us Delta Force Actual. The words hung in the air. Delta Force. It was a name spoken with reverence and awe in military circles. A name synonymous with legend, with shadows, with the impossible. But the last word, actual, it didn't immediately register with Matthews. To him, it sounded like senile rambling, a confused add-on from a man who'd seen too many action movies. A relieved smirk crept back onto the colonel's face. Delta Force, right. And I'm John Wayne. He scoffed, turning to his audience of junior officers. You hear that, gentlemen? We've got a real-life hero in our midst. This old-timer here thinks he was in Delta Force. He turned back to Arthur, his tone dripping with saccharine mockery. You've been watching too many movies, Pops. Now for the last time. He never finished the sentence. A voice, deep and resonant with command, cut through the room like a sword. Colonel Matthews. Every head turned. Standing at the edge of the crowd was a man who needed no introduction. General Harding, the commandant of the Marine Corps himself. A living 4-star legend, his chest a solid block of brightly colored ribbons that told the story of a lifetime of service and combat. His face, normally set in a stern but approachable expression, was a thundercloud. He began to walk forward, and the crowd of officers parted before him like the Red Sea. He didn't even glance at them. His eyes were fixed on one person, the old man in the worn suit. Colonel Matthews snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. General, sir, an unexpected honor. General Harding completely ignored him. He walked right past the colonel until he was standing directly in front of Arthur Vance's chair. The room had fallen utterly silent. You could hear the ice shifting in glasses from across the hall. Then, the unthinkable happened. General Harding, the highest-ranking officer in the entire United States Marine Corps, brought his heels together with an audible click. He raised his hand in a salute so sharp, so precise, so filled with profound respect that it seemed to vibrate with energy. He held it there, his gaze locked on the old man. Mr. Vance. The general's voice boomed in the stillness. Sir, I had no idea you would be here. It is an absolute honor. Colonel Matthews looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face, normally ruddy with confidence, had turned a pasty, sickly white. His mouth hung open slightly. "General, sir?" he stammered, his voice a weak croak. You know this man?" Finally, General Harding broke his salute and turned to face his subordinate. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a glacial fury that made Matthews physically recoil. "Know him?" The general's voice was dangerously low. "Colonel, you are standing in the presence of a living monument. This is Arthur Vance. Are you telling me you don't know that name?" "And no, sir," Matthews whispered, the truth a damning admission. The general took a step closer, his shadow falling over the trembling colonel. "Then allow me to educate you. In the late 1970s, when our nation realized it needed men who could do the impossible, they went looking for a certain kind of soldier. Not the loudest, not the strongest, but the smartest, the calmest, the most unbreakable. They found this man." He gestured toward Arthur. "He wasn't just one of the first operators selected for the unit you so casually named. He was a plank owner, a founding father. He helped write the doctrine. He designed the training. He created the very template for the modern special operator. The term he used, actual, is not some movie nonsense, Colonel. It is radio pro sign for the unit commander. He wasn't just in Delta. For a time, he was Delta." A collective gasp went through the room. The junior officers who had been snickering moments before now looked horrified, their faces flushed with shame. General Harding wasn't finished. His voice rose, filled with a righteous anger that resonated in every corner of the ballroom. "The missions this man led are the things of whispered legend. They are sealed in vaults under classifications you will never hold. He has rescued hostages, dismantled terror networks, and projected American power into the darkest corners of the world, all without any expectation of fame or recognition. The men he trained, the sons he mentored, went on to become the sergeants major and commanders of JSOC for the next 30 years. He doesn't wear a uniform, Colonel, because the one he truly earned is stitched into the very fabric of this nation's secret history." The general's gaze bored into Matthews, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "And you, in your perfect uniform, at your perfect party, you asked him his rank? His rank is founder. His unit is history. You judged him by his age and his suit. And in doing so, you have dishonored yourself and every Marine in this room. Now, you will stand here, you will face Mr. Vance, and you will render the sharpest salute of your career to a man whose boots you are not worthy to polish. Do you understand me, Colonel?" Shaking, his face a mess of humiliation and dawning comprehension, Colonel Matthews turned to face Arthur Vance. With a jerky, convulsive movement, he snapped to the position of attention. He raised his hand, his salute a desperate, trembling apology. Tears welled in his eyes, shame burning hotter than any desert sun he had ever endured. Arthur Vance simply watched him, his expression unreadable. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction. There was only a deep, profound weariness, the look of a man who had seen far too much of the world's folly. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acceptance that was somehow more damning than any rebuke. The general then turned to the assembled officers. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," he declared, his voice softening slightly, but losing none of its power. "The measure of a warrior is not the shine on his shoes or the rank on his collar. It is the quiet dignity in his heart and the weight of the sacrifices he has carried in silence. Never, ever forget that." Later that evening, after the general had personally escorted Arthur to the head table and the stunned silence had given way to a mortified, respectful buzz, Colonel Matthews approached Arthur's seat. The arrogance had been sandblasted away, leaving behind a raw, humbled man. "Sir," Matthews began, his voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Vance, there are no words. I was arrogant. I was ignorant. I was wrong. I am so deeply sorry." Arthur looked up from his plate. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit down, Colonel." Matthews sat, perching on the edge of the seat like a chastened schoolboy. "That uniform you wear," Arthur said, his voice quiet again. "It's a symbol. It's important. It represents an ideal. But it's easy to hide behind it. It's easy to let it become who you are, instead of the other way around." He took a slow sip of water. "The hardest battles I ever fought weren't against men with guns. They were against my own pride, my own fear, my own certainty that I was right. He looked at Matthews, and for the first time, a flicker of warmth entered his eyes. The uniform doesn't make the man, Colonel. The man makes the uniform. Never forget to see the man inside. Matthews could only nod, the simple wisdom of the words landing with the force of a physical blow. He had been so focused on the symbols of worth, the rank, the uniform, the event, that he had failed to see the actual worth of the man sitting right in front of him. He had been given a lesson in leadership more profound than any he had ever received at Quantico or the War College. A hero, a legend, had been standing right there, and he had tried to throw him out like trash. The story of Colonel Matthews and the old Delta Force founder became a quiet legend in the Marine Corps, a cautionary tale passed down from senior NCOs to cocky young lieutenants. It served as a powerful reminder that the greatest heroes are often the ones who have no need to announce themselves. They don't wear their valor on their sleeves. They carry it in the quiet stillness of their souls, in eyes that have seen the world's true face and have not looked away. They are the silent guardians, the unassuming giants who walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight, waiting only for those with the humility to see. So if you ever find yourself judging someone by their wrinkled clothes or their slow gait, take a moment. Pause and remember the story of Arthur Vance, the quiet man who carried the history of a nation's sharpest edge within him. True strength doesn't need to be loud. True honor doesn't need a spotlight. Sometimes, the most important person in the room is the one no one notices. Thank you for watching, and if this story moved you, please share it, so that others may learn the same lesson in respect and humility.